When a wealthy executive demanded an old man be removed from first class for smelling bad, she had no idea she was attacking a national hero. Colonel James Mitchell, a Medal of Honor recipient who had served in 3 wars, quietly endured the humiliation until a flight attendant recognized his military bearing. What happened next stunned the entire plane. As the pilot came over the intercom, what began as a moment of cruelty turned into a tribute heard at 30,000 feet. She tried to shame a veteran, but instead, the whole country ended up saluting him. Victoria Sterling glanced at her watch with irritation as passengers boarded. She had flown first class countless times and didn't expect to be disturbed today. Focused on her tablet, she sipped champagne and reviewed quarterly earnings reports. The moment she noticed the elderly man approaching seat to be right beside her, her expression changed instantly. "Excuse me, sir," she said sharply. "Are you sure you're not in the wrong section? This is first class." He handed her no response, only a quiet look and a boarding pass labeled "to be." She turned immediately to a nearby flight attendant. "There's a mistake," she said. "He's in the wrong seat." The attendant politely asked for the man's boarding pass and examined it. "No mistake, ma'am. He's in the right seat. I don't care what it says. I paid full price for this seat, and I shouldn't. We have to sit next to someone who clearly doesn't belong here." Nearby passengers began to take notice. The elderly man sat silently, gripping his seat arm, saying nothing. "The smell is unbearable," she snapped. "This isn't what I paid for." The attendant calmly offered to find her another seat if she was uncomfortable. "I'm not moving," Victoria barked. "He is. I have important work to do, and I can't focus with this." She gestured in disgust. "Next to me." The man started to stand, slow and with effort, speaking softly. "It's all right. I can move to the back." The attendant stopped him. "No, sir. Please stay seated. You're where you belong." Victoria pulled out her phone. "I'm recording this. For legal purposes, this is discrimination against paying customers. I'm being forced to sit next to someone with hygiene issues. This is unacceptable." Her camera caught the elderly man looking downward, face drawn, breathing slow and shallow. Other passengers shifted uncomfortably. One man in 3A muttered under his breath, "That's enough." Victoria ignored it, her voice rising. "This airline better compensate me for this. It's outrageous." The elderly man remained quiet, hands folded, face expressionless. The attendant returned with the boarding pass again, confirming the accuracy. "He's not only allowed here, but his ticket is fully valid," she said clearly. Victoria turned to her phone again. "My name is Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Financial. I'm documenting this discrimination and violation of my customer rights. I'm paying thousands to be seated here, and you're forcing me to sit next to someone clearly using a charity upgrade or discount." Her words were loud enough that passengers in economy heard. Conversations paused, heads turned. The man reached for a paperback book, ignoring the chaos. "I want to speak to the captain," she demanded. The flight attendant didn't respond. Another crew member, a male senior attendant, approached. "Ma'am, we ask that you stop recording and return to your seat," he said. "I won't. This airline will hear from my lawyer." The elderly man looked out the window, his face unreadable. "You're seriously telling me that this man gets the same seat I paid full price for?" The senior attendant ignored her and spoke to the man. "Sir, may I ask, did you serve?" "Yes, Army, retired colonel." The attendant nodded. "Thank you, sir." Victoria leaned closer. "Oh, please. Anyone can claim to be a veteran. Doesn't mean you should sit in first class." A woman nearby shook her head slowly. Another passenger whispered something to a companion. Victoria continued. "Look at him. You're telling me this is someone who belongs in first class? Look at his shoes. Look at his clothes. This is a joke." The elderly man remained unmoved. "I'm not moving until he does," she said. "I want this resolved now." The flight attendant repeated, "Ma'am, if you're uncomfortable, we're happy to relocate you to another seat. I paid for this exact seat. I won't be shuffled around for a man who clearly used charity points or some sympathy discount." Her voice got sharper. "This is first class. I expect a certain standard. This is disgusting." Passengers looked toward the front of the plane. Some had begun recording. "He's making the whole area smell like an old hospital," she continued. "It's absolutely disgusting." The attendant responded calmly again. "Ma'am, we've offered a solution. You've declined." Victoria raised her phone again. "I'm not being difficult. I'm protecting my rights. This is a breach of service and I have every right to demand fair treatment." She looked directly at the elderly man. "I don't know what scam you used to get this seat, but don't think people like me won't speak up." Still silent, the man stayed seated, showing no reaction. "You could have at least showered before boarding a plane," she muttered under her breath. "How do you expect anyone to sit next to you for 4 hours?" Another passenger in row 2 spoke up. "That's enough, lady." She turned on him. "Excuse me, you don't get to tell me what to do," he answered. "You're embarrassing yourself." She hissed back. "Mind your business." He shook his head. "It is our business. We're all stuck on this plane with you." Victoria leaned away but kept filming. "Everyone will know what kind of service this airline gives. No standards at all." She reached across the elderly man to grab something from his lap. "What kind of ticket is this? Let me see if it's even real." The man recoiled slightly. Her hand struck his paperback book, knocking it to the floor. As he leaned to pick it up, a small wallet slipped from his pocket and spilled open. A photograph slid onto the aisle, showing him in full military uniform beside President Johnson. Another passenger gasped. "What the wait?" someone whispered. "That's a Medal of Honor ceremony." Victoria scoffed. "Fake anyone can Photoshop a photo these days." A man in 3A stood. "No, that's real. That's President Johnson. That's a real Medal of Honor photo." Others leaned in. Victoria laughed dryly. "Please, people fake this stuff all the time to get free upgrades. It's fraud." She pointed at the ID card on the floor. "Probably printed this at home." The man in 3A picked it up carefully. "Lady, stop. That's a real military ID. You need to stop talking." But Victoria shook her head. "You're all being scammed. He's pretending to be a war hero. That's stolen valor." The elderly man froze. Every word she said cut deeper. The passengers had seen enough, and so had the flight crew. Marcus Rodriguez approached the cockpit with urgency and requested to speak to the captain. Captain Sarah Chen turned from her checklist and gave him her attention. He quickly explained the altercation in first class and identified the elderly man as Colonel James Mitchell, a retired Army officer and confirmed Medal of Honor recipient. Captain Chen immediately paused her pre-flight procedures and asked if he was certain. Marcus confirmed he had verified the information and read the official citation. Captain Chen accessed her tablet and found the citation herself. She read about a young lieutenant who held off an enemy assault for 6 hours, saved 17 lives, and refused evacuation until his men were safe. She learned that Colonel Mitchell had continued his military career through multiple wars, had been wounded repeatedly, and was honored by 4 presidents. She read how he lost his wife recently and was traveling to visit his daughter who was concerned about his mental health. Captain Chen ordered a crew meeting. She informed the attendants that Colonel Mitchell was seated in 2B and had been harassed by a passenger. She read aloud from his Medal of Honor citation, listing his heroic actions. The crew responded with quiet respect and unanimous agreement that the situation needed to be handled with care. Captain Chen informed airline corporate leadership and "We've received full authorization to proceed with her decision." She returned to her pre-flight routine but planned an announcement once airborne. Jennifer Walsh and Marcus Rodriguez prepared the cabin discreetly. Word spread quietly among passengers that the elderly man in 2 bytes was a highly decorated war hero. The atmosphere in the plane shifted. People who had earlier looked away now paid close attention. A businessman in 3A recognized the photograph from earlier and shared his own military background with nearby passengers. Several others began talking about family members who had served. Victoria remained unaware of the changing tone around her. She continued complaining, demanding attention, and documenting the situation on her phone. She insisted she had the right to be compensated for her inconvenience. She loudly stated that the man beside her was using charity points or a discount. She insisted he was not fit to sit in first class. Passengers around her began exchanging glances. More phones appeared, this time recording her behavior. As the plane ascended, Victoria's voice rose again. She stood and declared she had paid thousands for a luxury seat and was being forced to sit beside someone who did not belong. She called it a violation of customer service. She pointed at the elderly man and accused him of stealing valor. I demanded to see his paperwork and claimed his ID and photograph were fake. The passengers sat in stunned silence. A few shook their heads in disbelief. Others stared at her in quiet horror. The elderly man lowered his gaze and remained silent. Captain Chen waited for the perfect moment. Once the plane reached cruising altitude, she activated the intercom. Her voice filled the aircraft. She addressed the passengers and explained that a very special guest was on board. She identified Colonel James Mitchell by name, age, and military record. She explained that he had served in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. She detailed how he had earned the Medal of Honor, how he had saved lives, been wounded, and honored by presidents. She emphasized that he was traveling to see his daughter after recently losing his wife. She stated clearly that he represented the highest standard of American service and sacrifice. She spoke respectfully, firmly, and with authority. The plane went silent. Even Victoria froze. Captain Chen ended the announcement with gratitude, thanking Colonel Mitchell for his service. She requested that he join her in the cockpit as her personal guest. The silence turned into applause. Passengers rose to their feet. Some saluted, some reached out to shake his hand. Others had tears in their eyes. Colonel Mitchell slowly rose, accepted the applause, and moved forward. Passengers moved aside respectfully. Hands reached out. Voices said thank you. Heads nodded in admiration. Victoria remained standing, stunned and speechless, as the phones that had recorded her behavior now focused on her humiliation. Passengers looked at her with visible disgust. Her arrogance collapsed. Her claims crumbled in the face of truth. The business traveler in 3A spoke softly but firmly. He reminded her that she had disrespected a hero. He said she owed him and the rest of the plane an apology. She said nothing. Her phone was still recording. She lowered it. The atmosphere in the plane had transformed. People shared stories about veterans and their families. Passengers wrote messages on napkins and slips of paper, offering thanks. Someone began collecting notes. Others asked how to contribute to honor his late wife's memory. A quiet movement began to show gratitude. Airline staff documented everything and notified corporate. Victoria Sterling's name and actions were noted for internal review. Passengers offered to testify. Staff noted multiple video recordings already circulating on social media. As Colonel Mitchell entered the cockpit, passengers returned to their seats but continued whispering their admiration. The elderly man who had been insulted moments earlier was now recognized for what he truly was, a symbol of sacrifice, courage, and quiet dignity. Captain Chen and her co-pilot stood and saluted him. She addressed him with respect and gratitude. She confirmed his identity, his citation, and thanked him for his service. He responded humbly. The cockpit became a place of honor. Colonel Mitchell stood tall again. The cabin behind him was now united in shared respect. A once divided and tense space had become reverent. The passenger who had tried to push him down was now forgotten. His presence had reminded everyone what real strength looked like. No title, no position, no wealth could erase the impact of a life built on service. Colonel James Mitchell exited the cockpit and returned to the first-class cabin where every passenger stood and applauded. The businessman in 3A stepped forward first and shook his hand. Others followed, offering handshakes, pats on the shoulder, and heartfelt thanks. Several passengers asked to take photos with him. Some shared stories of their own family members who had served. Flight attendants distributed paper and pens for anyone who wanted to leave a note of appreciation. Dozens participated. A collection began among passengers to send flowers to Margaret Mitchell's grave. Jennifer Walsh handed Colonel Mitchell a pair of pilot wings gifted by Captain Chen. James accepted them quietly, tears forming in his eyes. A young man from coach came forward and saluted him, followed by a woman who said her son was serving overseas and asked James to sign a napkin to send him. Colonel Mitchell responded to every gesture with grace and humility. He thanked everyone sincerely, expressing that he hadn't felt this respected in years. Passengers continued to share stories of military family members, deployments, and sacrifices. The atmosphere became reflective and united. Many passengers who hadn't spoken to each other before were now connecting over shared gratitude. The businessman in 3A suggested compiling all the notes into a formal tribute package to be sent after landing. He volunteered to coordinate. Crew members helped gather contact information. Victoria Sterling sat silently, phone in her lap, face pale and unreadable. She was no longer recording. Passengers avoided looking at her or glanced at her with disdain. The earlier bravado in her tone had vanished. Her attempts to command the situation had failed. She was no longer the center of power or authority. Jennifer Walsh approached her professionally and informed her that her behavior was being reported to airline management. She was advised that future travel privileges could be impacted. Victoria gave no reply. The cabin crew completed a detailed report and submitted it electronically. The video recordings of her harassment and the captain's announcement had already been uploaded and shared by passengers. Views were climbing in real time. When the plane landed, a crowd of passengers waited near the exit row to shake Colonel Mitchell's hand again before deplaning. The airline CEO contacted James personally to offer a full public apology and issued a lifetime flight pass in his honor. Corporate communications released a statement supporting military veterans and condemning discriminatory behavior. Victoria Sterling's company began facing online backlash within hours. Public sentiment turned swiftly. Petitions demanded her resignation. Former employees of her company came forward with stories about her mistreatment of subordinates. Her board convened an emergency meeting. Within 48 hours, Victoria Sterling stepped down as CEO. Her company announced a new initiative to support veteran hiring and implemented corporate sensitivity training. Colonel James Mitchell's story went viral. National news picked it up. He was invited to speak on morning shows and veteran panels. Communities organized events in his honor. Local schools invited him to speak to students about duty and sacrifice. Veteran organizations reached out to collaborate. Donations to mental health programs for aging veterans spiked. James was offered support he hadn't known existed. He began traveling again, speaking at events, connecting with people, and honoring fellow veterans. He used his platform to speak about grief, loneliness, and the importance of compassion. He encouraged others to check on aging service members and to remember the unseen battles they often carry. The man who had boarded Flight 447 feeling forgotten now, felt valued and connected. 6 months later, James stood at his wife's grave in Arlington National Cemetery. In his hands, he held hundreds of handwritten letters and notes from passengers. On that flight, he laid a small bouquet and a folded American flag at Margaret's headstone. He whispered softly that he was finally okay. The flight had changed him. It reminded him that the values he had lived by still mattered to others. It proved that dignity could survive cruelty, and truth could overcome ignorance. That moment of public humiliation had transformed into a national outpouring of respect. The voices that had once criticized him were replaced by millions honoring his name. His face was now recognized, not for vanity, but for vanity. Airlines adopted policies to better identify and assist elderly veterans. Employees were trained to handle similar situations with heightened awareness and sensitivity. Veteran service officers cited his story in campaigns promoting mental health support. Students wrote essays about what it means to serve after hearing his speeches. He received invitations from Congress, the Pentagon, and military academies. But James always responded the same way. He wasn't seeking fame. He just wanted people to remember that every veteran has a story. Every uniform hides a human soul. Every old man shuffling down the aisle might have once led soldiers through hell. Victoria Sterling remained out of the public eye. She issued a formal apology but received little sympathy. Her name became a cautionary tale. Her actions were used in training seminars and case studies on corporate responsibility and public behavior. Colonel James Mitchell's grace in the face of cruelty, but it became the standard. His quote, "Everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. A little kindness goes a long way," was printed on posters, memorials, and military newsletters across the country. That flight, once a routine journey, became a turning point in his life. What began as insult ended as inspiration. What began as humiliation ended in healing. What began as ignorance ended in impact. Colonel Mitchell's name was no longer buried in the pages of history. It was now a living reminder that sacrifice should never be silenced and that honor deserves recognition.